and that oftentimes during the summertime they would have things like concerts, they would have entertainment in the plaza area down around the World Trade Center. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here, and it's tough to put any kind of positive spin on this, but it's conceivable that not just the 40, 50,000 in the World Trade Center might have been lost, but an additional how many thousand on the ground. And if those buildings had collapsed in a different way, if they had tipped instead of simply imploding and dropping almost straight down, all the buildings around them could have been at risk. So the potential loss of life, while 5,000 is certainly a horrible situation, the potential loss of life could have been much, much higher. And then when you think about the fact that this time those planes didn't have nuclear weapons, they didn't have chemical weapons, they didn't have biological weapons, but if you think these folks are going to not use those if and when they get their hands on them, I would guess you have another thing coming. It's a matter of time. That'll be next.
You know, and back in '93, Ramzi Youssef calculated that one would topple into the other.
Right.
And they were thinking in terms of what you're saying of 250,000 potential casualties. And at that time, he put cyanide gas right at ground at B2 level, but the heat of the explosion evaporated it. This time, I would imagine the planes were timed to come in almost simultaneously and take both towers down exactly in that same scenario. But you know, the chilling thing is when Ramzi Youssef was brought back from Pakistan on the plane to the federal marshal, he looked out over as they came over the trade towers, and he said, if I had a bit more time and a little more money, I could have done the correct job, and then to see it come down, you know. And quite frankly, I worked on the civil litigation on that case with a couple of plaintiffs, and there were reports that the Port Authority had as far back as '88 pinpointing that level. And at that time, they felt they didn't want to stop public access. It would be too chilling to the economy of the area. But this is a telltale sign of what a terrorist will go to wreak havoc in our society.
John's on the phone in Texas. John?
Yeah, hello. I'm in the military at Fort Hood, Texas, with the 4th Infantry Division Mechanized. And I'm a little concerned about our current situation. I know that the weeks prior to this incident, they were actually contemplating reducing by 2 divisions the Army, and I'm not sure what the thought is on that now. But I know that the Army is severely undermanned right now. My platoon is an entire tank crew down. We have one tank that's just sitting in the motor pool without a crew. We're waiting for NCOs right now. The majority of our gunners are E3s and below, which they should be E5s and below. And I notice that people want that instant gratification. They want us to go out there and kick some butt. But I think we really have to sit back and be prudent and think about what we have to do. We have to reorganize. And 4th ID is the new Force 21. They're using the new M1A2 SEP tanks. It's all pretty new. And a lot of stuff, there's a lot of kinks that need to be worked out.
All right, John, there was some debate, obviously, between the administration and members of Congress about funding for the Defense Department military spending. In a matter of hours after this happened, the Congress appropriated, I think, $40 billion as a down payment on the funds needed to do this. Your point about being patient is a good one. It's going to take some time to plan this and to define the targets and mount the plans for the operations. And my guess is, and it's just a guess, but I've been covering news for a number of years, that you will see a lot of resources poured into the military in very short order, and we just hope when it's time that you guys can get the job done and all get home safely. Nice to have you on the program with us. We have Steve Harrington, who's a CNN reporter in northern Afghanistan, and he is joining us now. Harrigan? Steve Harrigan, can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you fine, Jack.
What's the latest over there? What can you tell us? We're hearing all sorts of scary warnings coming out of the Taliban, the Afghani leadership. The last report I heard, they are in hiding. Give us an update on the situation there if you can.
Sure. Jack, we're in northern Afghanistan. That's the part of the country, about 5 to 10%, that's still under control by Afghans who are in opposition to the Taliban. So these people here want to fight against the Taliban, and they are welcoming, even calling for U.S. military action against the Taliban. They want to take part in that fight. What's happened here today, the reason we're here now is they've just buried their top commander, Ahmed Shah Massoud. Now, he might not be familiar to many of your listeners, but he was the top commander here of the opposition, and he was assassinated immediately before those terrorist attacks in the United States. So the opposition here sees a clear link, an attempt by the Taliban to knock out the opposition here before going ahead with those terrorist attacks in the United States. But people here now in the opposition are standing firm. They say they want to fight. We've just seen a very emotional funeral when they buried their top commander, Massoud. They carried the body out of a helicopter by hand, people wailing, villagers here from northern Afghanistan lining the road. It's a very emotional scene as they've laid to rest their top commander, Shah Massoud. Jack?
What kind of numbers and what kinds of resources do they have, Steve?
As far as regular fighters go, the Northern Alliance says to have about 15,000 fighters, trained fighters, and perhaps about 15,000 more irregular fighters. And as you know, they've been battling the Taliban for about 5 years now. They've been driven back here into one of the most remote regions on Earth. We're giving you this live shot now without electricity. We're in a mountain range. It's a very difficult place to get to, but we've seen men armed with Kalashnikovs, the very same Kalashnikovs they fought against the Soviet Union with. And they're hoping that this crisis could be an opportunity for them to move against the Taliban. They say contacts so far with the United States have been minimal, but they hope to use their experience, to put that experience to work in working against the Taliban.
Do they expect the United States to fund whatever operation they have in mind?
They're hoping and calling for aid and to fight together. The question really is, how firm an alliance is this Northern Alliance? We've seen in the past a lot of squabbling between top commanders, and now their very top man has just been assassinated. So can they hold together as a fighting force? That's the real test.
All right, thanks, Steve, very much. Steve Harrigan reporting live from northern Afghanistan. Is that a formidable and significant opposition force that he's talking about over there?
I don't think so. I think the Taliban has Afghanistan wrapped up. And you know, I wonder, why is all this interest in finding a state sponsorship of a terrorist organization to enact the War Act, when in fact the Taliban gives him cover, they give him logistics, they give him support, they give him free reign for money raised by the poppy trade. I mean, it's clear to me that they're a terrorist supporting state. I just cannot understand the logic of commentators and politicians not to see that clearly. I mean, it's harder to make a case against Iraq, certainly Syria, Iran, but,
Sure.
but clearly if there's an arrest warrant out for this man, and giving him shelter, they're housing him, and they deny that he is capable of even doing this. So it seems to me that it boggles the mind that in a modern era, why we don't consider this state sponsorship of terrorism.
That's the very thing President Bush was talking about. And
Yeah.
Colin Powell went to great lengths to talk about over and over in the early briefings in the day or two after this happened, that states that sponsor these people, harbor them, fund them, protect them in any way, are as guilty and as liable for retaliation as the terrorists themselves.
But that seems like the perfect model of this behavior. I don't understand why we're not ready to say, other than it's just one of a pariah state, that it is a state sponsorship of terrorism.
Let's bring in Major Garrett, who's live at the White House this evening, and get the latest from him on what's going on down there, and perhaps he can address what he may have heard concerning the subject of a possible declaration of war at some point in the future. Major Garrett, nice to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Jack. To take on the point that Harvey was just making, it's very clear, talking to senior administration officials, that when the president said, the first time a president has ever said on Tuesday, that not only will the United States hold accountable those who were directly responsible for the terrorist acts, but states that provided them shelter or aid and comfort. No one around here is calling that a Bush doctrine, but it is a significant change in U.S. policy. And the president has gradually, with his rhetoric and with what he asked Congress to approve as an act of providing him the legal authority to use force, is trying to turn the American people from traditional definitions of war fighting against nation states, against nations with borders, as he said in his radio address today, a battle with beachheads, to one that is of entirely greater, more complexity, and saying it's not going to be just one place, it's not going to be just one agent of terror, but the United States is going to try to hold and will do everything in its power to hold accountable multiple sources of this, what the president has often described as evil. And in the use of force resolution the Congress approved, almost unanimously, one dissenting vote from one House Democrat from California, the Congress has embraced that new notion of warfare, that it is not just the perpetrators, the direct perpetrators of an act, but any other nations that may have provided aid and comfort. It is a significant shift in not only U.S. policy, but in the way the United States is going to act within the confines of international law. And I think you're seeing and have seen over the days the President trying to explain this to the American public. Things are moving so rapidly that it is even hard at times to fathom these changes, but I think the President is trying to work the country through it and to communicate as best he can this shift, moving away from the traditional understanding of warfare and the concepts, geographical and otherwise, of warfare to one that has many, many more layers, a higher degree of complexity.
Mike in Ohio, be patient. You're coming up in just a minute. Major Garrett, though, before we leave you, what's the difference between a resolution authorizing the use of force and a declaration of war?
Well, minimal, actually. I mean, it is now clear, and the President, of course, had the constitutional right to respond militarily to this attack on the United States without a use of force resolution coming from Congress. But he sought it for one very strategic, political, and constitutional reason. So there would be absolutely no question that all legal authority was placed in his hands to respond to this act of terror committed against the United States. The President has said, we are at war. He said so today at Camp David. He has made it clear in days before. This was an act of war. We have been attacked. We will now prosecute a war against terrorism. And now he has the full and complete legal authority to do so, given to him by a nearly unanimous Congress. It's worth pointing out that the last time Congress debated a use of force resolution, the reaction and the ultimate vote was much narrower. You'll recall in the United States Senate, his father, President George Herbert Walker Bush, received support of Congress by a vote of 52 to 48 to prosecute the war against Saddam Hussein and liberate Kuwait. There is no such ambiguity now, and the President knows it, and he intends to carry that lack of ambiguity forward on the international stage, prosecuting this war. Jack?
Major Garrett, live in Washington, thank you. As we move forward, it's at 12:57 Eastern Daylight Time. You were talking about states that harbor and sponsor terrorism, Harvey Kirshner. This gets a little tricky, doesn't it? I mean, the obvious ones like Iraq and Afghanistan and perhaps Yemen and the Sudan and places like that, that's one kettle of fish. What about places like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Iran and Afghanistan, who we have requested certain concessions and cooperative efforts from? I mean, you could make the argument that some of Osama bin Laden's troops have been educated in those Islamic fundamentalist schools inside Pakistan. I mean, their hands aren't clean in any of this. How do you sort out? I mean, is it a black and white issue? They've seemed to create the impression that it is. You're either with us or you're against us. If you sponsor terrorism or harbor them or grant safe haven to them, you're our enemy. But are they all really?
Well, that's just it. That's the ambiguity in that region of the world. I mean, you mentioned, let's take Egypt, for example.
Right.
Certainly, in this particular operation, I would imagine that some of these suicide bombers might have come from Egypt and might have gotten some training inside there as well. But the Egyptian government under Mubarak really is under siege by terrorism itself. He's looked to be toppled at any given time. So I don't think the spirit of the Egyptian government really is to support terrorist actions against these United States, whereas other states that you mentioned, Iran, certainly Iraq, questionable Syria, and others.
Syria is a perfect example.
Well, they do. They supported, certainly in the Lebanon and the training camps.
Of course,
there.
the Bekaa Valley.
Absolutely,
full of terrorists.
and they used the drug money from the Bekaa Valley to finance this.
And the leader's father, Assad's dad,
that's correct.
ran this whole operation for years.
Jack.
Now the son has come out with this statement. I mean, can you believe what these people say? The son issued a statement, was it yesterday or the day before? We deplore these acts, we deplore terror, and blah, 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 blah.
That's the problem. That's the problem we face, the ambiguity of who the enemy is. It seems that the structure that's been set up worldwide, and especially in the United States, has this ambiguous and sometimes specific support of these actions. You know, it's important to state over and over again that if we take out Osama bin Laden, The problem is not going to go away. There are
one
other
guy.
people who are going to step up to the plate. The same thing in the drug trade. It's because you have people who are willing to die for that particular cause.
Right.
And there are a significant number in that region of the world.